Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen W. Long, and this is The Writing Life. And I know we're all special, all my guests are special, but today is kind of extra. This young lady, let me read you some things here, which I want to talk to you about naturally. She is a certified feng shui consultant and a Fulbright scholar, right? Whose essays, features, and commentary have been featured in Good Housekeeping, Marie Claire, mm-hmm. Okay, The Atlantic, which is cool, Design Sponge, I'd not heard of that, Salon and Publishers Weekly, and sort of maybe on a more consistent basis, the editor of Oregon Home Magazine. She's been, for years now, a critical part of the Terroir Creative Writing Festival, and the reason it's special, she's also my friend. So Emily Grosvenor, welcome to The Writing Life.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, welcome back to The Writing Life, because this is your second book, right?
Yes, actually.
Yeah, we talked about tessellation before. But I wanted to say a couple of things before we get rolling. Well, one thing is the Fulbright Scholarship. I know the name, or I know the word. Does that mean that you studied abroad?
So
I don't know what that is.
It's a program started by Senator Fulbright in the post-war period in order to develop ties between the United States and other countries. So I went with the German program.
Okay.
I had a student Fulbright, which meant that I proposed a project. My project at the time, this was like 2001, was to study the German book publishing industry. They had some really interesting things going on over there. Just as an example, readers really know who publishes what, so they feel really comfortable going to like the specific publisher because they know they're going to like everything by that publisher.
Oh, really?
Whereas,
okay.
You know, in this country, we don't really have that kind of knowledge about the publishing industry. We don't have that kind of awareness. So I thought that was really interesting. And then they also had these like public-private partnerships going on called literature houses. So I think at the time they had like 8 or 9 of them. So I was at the one in Munich.
Okay.
I did an internship there. So those are kind of places where they hosted literary events.
Okay.
You wouldn't have seen literary events going on, say, in the bookstores. And then I was looking at just at the book industry in general. There were a lot of specialty bookshops coming up, which I thought were interesting. There were places where they were pairing like this book with that wine, like a wine and book place. And then there was like furniture stores that also specialized in like a very aesthetic looking books that would look good in your home. So I was just
almost
really
like an accessory.
Yeah, I was really just fascinated by how interesting that book culture was. And of course I went to the Frankfurt Book Fair and the Leipzig Book Fair and did all those things.
Yeah. And I suspect in Munich you studied at the Hofbrauhaus.
No, I did not. Okay. No, although I have been there. I actually prefer the Spaten House.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's I think there's 4 major breweries, or maybe it was 6. It's been a while since I've been over there. And every one of them has their own place. So Hofbräu has their own place, which a lot of Americans know. And then Spaten, their brewery is actually near the opera. Oh. So that was more my jam.
Okay, okay. Yep. Well, I wanted to learn about that, and I also want to say to you, and congratulations, this is such a beautiful book. And it's a beautiful book for its content, but it's a beautiful book as a thing. And I wondered, how did that get designed? So there's artwork inside. The book itself, I mean, there's a texture to it. Did the publisher do that? Was this your idea, or how did that come about?
This is all Chronicle. So my publisher is Chronicle Prism. That's an imprint of Chronicle books in San Francisco. Okay. They're an independent publisher, and they are known for making drop-dead gorgeous books. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I was so honored to go with them. So we built it all together. So a lot of the illustrations came from ideas that I came up with, and then I would create little mood boards for each of the illustrations. Really? Yeah. So a ton of work went into those illustrations. And then the creative director, Pamela Geismar is her name, So she would kind of pick what she thought was most interesting from my ideas, and then she would work with the illustrator, who's Mar Hernandez, who is actually a very famous Spanish artist and illustrator.
Okay.
She's like represented by Saatchi. She does a weekly illustration for Dwell magazine. She works with New York Times, MailChimp, all these big people. So I think, like, I'm just a writer in Oregon. Like Mar Hernandez, like I kind of wish her name were on the cover too.
Sure.
She is just, she's unbelievable. Like she is just an unbelievable illustrator. So, you know, at the same time that we were editing the text, we were also working through those ideas of, you know, what do we illustrate? I think the book has 20 larger illustrations, and then 15 spot illustrations, they're called, the little ones.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, there was a lot of work that went into what colors do we use. Like if you look at it like that, like the back of the book is actually like an apricot, and the front it's this beautiful teal, which I feel very, very aligned with.
Yeah.
So, you know, Chronicle puts a lot of attention into what the emerging colors are for that season. So, you know, they have these color studies, and they look at what is going to be popular. It's really fascinating. Around the time that the book came out, I actually went up to Owl's Garden Center near it's north of 99.
I know it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in Owl's Garden Center, and I actually they have like a women's clothing section. And I actually saw like a whole little section of clothing that were these colors together, because everyone has this information, right? Everyone who's making
the colors of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that it all felt really special, and honestly, they gave me a lot of control. You hear a lot about, you know, I didn't get to decide this or that, but they were so good at involving me, and because of that, you know, I really trust them.
Sure.
I wanted to work with them because I wanted to work with professionals who knew what they were doing. So I got really, really lucky.
Well, I didn't know about the colors of the year. I really thought that these and the internal illustrations as well are so appropriate for what. Well, I thought that it was just for you. I mean, it sure came out like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a real compliment.
Yeah. No, it was terrific. If you're okay with this, I want to just touch on one other thing. The book is dedicated to your mom. Can you talk a little bit about why and how? And
there's no one else I could have gone to.
Yeah.
Like even my husband was like, I get it. This one's for your mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my mom and I, she loves houses. And we grew up going to open house tours on the weekends.
Yeah.
Usually on Sunday afternoons, we would pick a couple houses and go tour them. And for a while, I thought we were moving. So I was like, oh, we're moving. I'd pick out a room, and and we would always come back to our house, and she'd be like, I think we'll take this one. And she had thought about moving. It's not like she had planned
so this
that to
wasn't
be,
just entertainment.
No.
Okay.
She really had thought about moving, but nothing ever really was just right. So she actually ended up staying in that home for 40 years.
Okay.
And I just moved her out here a year ago.
Well, I met her.
You did meet her.
Yeah, at the book signing.
And we also, like, on our vacations, we would go to, you know, Hyde Park and the Astor's Beechwood and Mount Vernon and the Breakers in Newport. I mean, we really like a good home.
Yeah. And I think by maybe osmosis, you're absorbing these styles and what works and what doesn't. And I would guess that your mom maybe made a comment once in a while, and oh, look at that, either in a good way or not a good way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's half the fun, isn't it?
Sure.
Is having an opinion.
Sure.
But it's interesting to see like where our style preferences converge and where they separate. Because as I get older, I find that it's not that I think like my mother, it's just I understand where she was at that point in her life a lot more.
Well, that, and I think, you know, we change as we age or learn more, or things, you know, the styles change.
Right.
And something new is introduced maybe. And so you did your hands like this, and I wonder if it doesn't go like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
They come and go.
Absolutely, and that's part of the fun, honestly. Like when we spend time, like she has been going on this book tour with me, and so she's been doing all of this.
Yeah.
And it's such a joy. It's such a joy to take her along.
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet she's still commenting. So I know the term feng shui. You're a consultant. And I think with just your whole, I don't know some of the other, like for the Atlantic and so on, but certainly Oregon home,
Mm-hmm.
That's the focus. So how does feng shui go? Well, first, can you define that, and then how does that factor into the design?
Sure. So feng shui has its roots in Chinese astrology.
Okay.
So it's not something I created.
Right.
It actually, it's had a couple different moments in U.S. history where people have kind of latched onto it, and it's become a little more important. Like then in the 90s, there was a little bit of a feng shui boom. It's basically about the art of placement, and it's about working with the energy within your home to get what you want in life.
Okay.
So the way I look at it, I would say what I do kind of cuts through the middle between environmental psychology and feng shui. So I do play a little bit with the more magical elements of feng shui.
Mm-hmm.
If you search for it online, you're sure to come up with articles like, oh, put this plant in your wealth corner in order to, land the job you want. So, some of those stories are helpful and some of it is really interesting, but I also look at kind of bigger picture desires of what people want for their lives.
Yeah.
And we try to make what I call spatial shifts within the home in order to help them achieve what they're looking for, right? So just as an example, within feng shui, there's a part of the home that corresponds to your marriage and partnership, right? So in feng shui, they would say to place images there of happy couples, maybe of you with your partner, things that kind of give you those warm feelings. There's earth materials are important in that area. They're said to attract that kind of good energy. So that's feng shui. From an environmental psychology and like a design standpoint, you also need to be thinking about how do I set up the bedroom in order to have each member of the partnership feel valued, right? How do we...
You talked about the 2 nightstands.
Right,
Yeah.
right. How do...
And not having the bed up against the wall.
How do we create space for
Yeah.
partnership, right?
Yeah.
Like my husband and I, one thing we've kind of adopted just into our daily routine when the weather is nice is we meet with each other on the porch in the front of our home, and we can kind of watch the kids coming and going and the neighbors coming and going. But that's our time and that's our space. The kids don't really like hang out with us on the porch, right? It's a space that's all ours. So just having these moments in the house that remind you of your partnership and the importance of your partnership is helpful.
Okay. So guide me through this, because I may say it wrong and I may be misunderstanding. But a bagua, and that's like superimposed on the footprint of the house.
Right.
I mean, a drawing. And that would define these areas, and then you work within that.
Yes.
Within that area.
That's exactly how it works. So every space has you could create like an aerial view floor plan of it. And then the bagua is a map, an energy map that is superimposed on that floor plan. So each of I think what people get hung up on is that the purpose within the bagua doesn't necessarily align to what's going on within your house, right? So I was actually speaking to a book club the other day, and there was a woman there who said, but my office is in my love and partnership area.
Right.
And I said, what's your relationship to your work? Do you love it? And she's like, oh, I do love it.
Yeah, see.
And that's a problem for my marriage. And I'm like, aha, right? So that's a moment where you could make some shifts within that space in order to support the partnership a little better.
It was interesting. So there, for me, my interpretation is the feng shui to me is a little bit mystical.
Mm-hmm.
But in your book, you certainly have that, but then you also have, you cite studies, like the environmental, I'm not going to say this right, but studies that have been done about color, mm-hmm. or I'm going to say temperature, something like that. And you incorporate both of those, which to me makes a lot of sense.
Right. So we're learning a lot about, I mean, these are ancient rituals. They've
Sure.
been around for a very long time. And there haven't been studies done to back up everything that,
right.
all of human behavior, right? But the interesting thing is when the studies do come up where you say, aha, right? That thing that I've been doing, there's science behind it.
Right.
One of my favorite ones is the idea that just seeing a light bulb can spark creativity, right?
Okay.
Like a light bulb going on
Yeah.
can help prime you for your work, right? So that news actually came out in about 2011, and in the aftermath, you've kind of seen it kind of leak out into the design world. We've seen a lot of lamps that have like bare
Sure.
like shadeless lamps, so that
Right.
you can actually see the light bulb going on.
So it strikes me, and again, maybe because it's not skepticism, it's just a different look, is that there'll be an action and a response, you know, the desired, so you put the plant there to foster a feeling.
Right.
And, oh, that's mystical. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe we're drawn to nature, or the colors that you choose. I think that there's no secret that some are calming, some are agitating. Right. And so there may be two ways to look at the same thing, and they're both valid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also think it's about intention, right?
Yeah.
It's not just that plant's actually doing something. It's about in your mind telling yourself, I'm putting this plant here in order to make myself feel more at home. It's the act of homemaking. And by doing it,
Yeah.
you start to feel more at home.
I wanted to say earlier, but what a good segue. I love the title.
Thank you.
Finding Yourself at Home, because it has a couple of meanings.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think a lot of us found ourselves at home during COVID.
Sure.
And we looked around and we were like, I don't know what I want, but it's not this.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
And I think you say this a couple of times, both now and in the book, about intention.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost, I just thought of this example, it's like writing yourself a note.
Exactly.
So when you write yourself a note, sometimes you don't need the note, because the act of writing it down
Right.
is what cements it in your consciousness.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's the same way with, they say if you want to make something happen, write it down.
Yeah.
Because there's a connection between actually writing it and then follow through.
Yeah. And Emily, not to put you on the spot, but in fact, before we started recording, you talked about that this is personal. This is a personal book, or there's a lot of
Right.
personal references. So that's kind of one thing, but part of that is the examples of you interacting with a client.
Mm-hmm.
So the put you on the spot part of this is, can you recall some of those instances that represent something? Where a client had a particular problem or a desire, and you could identify that and make a suggestion,
Yeah.
and then what was the result?
I had a really amazing interaction with a client who had kept an old quilt in the bedroom with her. Her bedroom was located in the travel and helpful people area. So, we were trying to figure out, okay, so you want to travel more, what kind of imagery could we bring into this space in order to inspire travel?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, this is interesting. She had it like hanging on one of those quilt hanger
Sure.
things,
Yeah.
and it wasn't completed. So anytime I encounter like an incomplete project, I'm always like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What's going on there? So I asked her about it, and she's like, oh, I started that for my brother for his wedding. And I was like, oh, when's he getting married?
Yeah,
and she's
exactly.
like, he got married 25 years ago,
Yeah.
and I have not finished it. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, that's interesting. What's your relationship with your brother like? And she's like, oh, it's terrible. I always want it to be different, and it's never any different. And it brings me so much pain. And I was like, you have this like right next to where you sleep. Like, how are you like you're absorbing
Right.
all of that. Like
Right.
that's what this represents.
Yeah.
What should we do with this? What do you want to do with this? Do you want to finish it and give it to him? Is now the moment? And so I caught up with her a couple months later and asked her what she had done, and she's like, funny thing, I decided I was just going to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So I just donated it to a church group that could use the materials, and I just accepted that I wasn't going to have a relationship with my brother. So that doesn't seem like that's not like a happy-go-lucky story, but
No, but
it's very telling.
But you identify the association between their physical space and
Right.
their emotion.
Right.
And I think you're to be commended for that, because again, maybe that's your training or maybe that's your natural orientation, but I would have missed that. I wouldn't have made that connection. Another one that I think about is there was a picture, I think, of a relative, but behind a glass
Oh yeah.
in a cabinet. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I had a client who had a lot of family pictures, but they were only behind glass in kind of like this walled bookshelf. And I was like, oh, that's it. You know, when I go into a home, I'm just like endlessly fascinated with how people live and how people make choices.
Right.
And in that case, I was like, oh, why are they behind glass? You know, are they dead?
Yeah.
Is she trying to preserve, you know, that part of her life?
Right.
You know, I'm a writer first, so I always think in terms of metaphors. So even with things, I'm like,
Sure.
oh, what's that a metaphor for?
Right.
I probably drive my family crazy doing that. And yeah, she was like, oh, it's because I don't want to see them every day.
The pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she had some relationship stuff that she had to work through.
Huh.
Crazy, right?
Well, subtle.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's
Well,
crazy.
and she didn't even. I mean, we don't even realize we're doing this. I mean, I notice because I'm always.
You're tuned into that.
Yeah, if I have a problem with someone, I will literally take a picture of them and put them on my fridge so that I see them every single day, and I'm exposed to that, and I go through like a forgiveness practice, and I'm like, okay, until I'm done, until I can just like put them back in the drawer.
You had talked about practice forgiveness.
Yeah.
And to me, the umbrella for all this is consciousness, or with intent. That we don't just kind of drift through life, but you identify these things and deal with them.
Right.
And I think that's part of what you've done there. Not that this is you, but as I was reading the book, my daughter talked about a friend of hers who arranges her furniture by centrifugal force.
Oh.
It's just, in other words, everything is against the wall. You know, it's
right.
just like it spin it and it's out there. And you had talked about, again, intentionally putting things not in the way, but with purpose, with intention. And it was different than my experience, and I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenon. Like a lot of people do that. They'll push their furniture up against the wall, and sometimes I see it, especially in houses of people with younger children, because the kids are all on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to like foster conversation, generally it's better to kind of bring the sofa and the chairs a little closer together.
I think, if I remember correctly, there was also, you're talking about a big space that was, I'm going to use the word inappropriate, and to break it up with furniture, to make sort of a designated this and a designated that.
I think that's the problem with modern living. Like
Okay.
when you listen to when you watch HGTV, everyone's like, oh, I want an open floor plan.
Mm-hmm.
But it's my theory that open floor plans are actually making us a little crazy, because you can see everything that's going on and you're not being like cued to how to behave, right?
Okay.
Like in Victorian times, people knew how to behave because there was a dining room, there was a parlor,
Right.
there was a really strong like public-private separation, right? Whereas now, you know, I have children, and it's very difficult to keep anybody at the table, because they can see what they were doing before dinner, like is right there, or I can see the dishes that need to be done. That it's very it's much more difficult to stay in the moment.
It's too much.
Right?
Yeah.
So now what's interesting in the design community right now is people are actually building barriers between the rooms, right? Like not necessarily a wall, but like
Like
kind
a
of
triptych maybe or something?
Yeah, a little bit. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I'll put up like a screen or like
Sure.
an interesting like wooden motif
Sure.
that just creates some type of barrier. Or that's like a post-COVID thing that's happening.
Oh, interesting. So again, there's just so much to touch on, but you talked about a wooden thing. And that reminded me that these areas, and there's 9, right, in Abagua, that there are materials that would be compatible. There are colors and there are shapes.
Yeah.
And I can't, and we don't have time to do everything, but just mention something that makes sense to you in some area.
Okay. Well, I can talk about my office.
Sure.
So in my office, which is in the Travel and Helpful People area, the auspicious color there is white.
Okay.
The auspicious material is metal. And the auspicious shape is round objects. So some ways that I've brought in elements that would attract good energy. I have like a round Herman Miller lamp pendant that I have hung from the ceiling. That was a recent addition. The room itself is white. The walls are white, and I have a green bookshelf, but you know, I kept those walls white. And then I have some like metal art sculptures that I've put on the wall. And all of it, the weird thing about feng shui is if you pay attention to the materials and you try to use all of those materials, you try to use the water, the wood, the fire, the earth, the metal, all in one space, it has a harmonizing effect. And it ends up looking just right. And you see it in magazine images as well. Like I can look at a really good image and say, oh my gosh, it has all the elements. Of course, this image makes me feel good.
Yeah, that's a new word for me, harmonizing?
Harmonizing.
Harmonizing,
Yeah.
Oh, I just misheard. Okay. We talked about how in some cases the book is so personal. And additionally, you talk about, or mention in the book, talking to the house and talking to the objects. And there's a word that I've come across recently, or frequently recently, and that is panpsychism.
Oh.
Do you know that word?
Well, tell me about that.
Well, panpsychism is that everything, table, everything, has to some degree self-awareness. And I thought when you talk to your house, and in fact, I think at one point you were going to leave the house, or you were going to move, or somebody was going to move, and to tell the house thank you for all you did. Well, it was your mother's house, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I also have one of my favorite stories is a friend here in town who wanted to sell her house.
Yeah.
And she had the house sale fall through 2 times. She had already put a bid on another house in town. And I said, oh my gosh, your house doesn't want you to leave.
Right.
She was in like a really clingy house, and I was like, you just need to like write a letter to your house, thank your house for the good times, let it know it's gonna be cared for. And she did that, and then it sold.
Yeah.
Right? It happened almost immediately. So, you know, the great thing about this is there's different ways in, right? For some people, it's enough for them. They're comfortable with the idea that they're actually having a conversation with themselves when they're talking to their house.
Okay.
They're like, oh, it's about talking to yourself. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's what you're comfortable with, because some people
To
aren't.
characterize it like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some people aren't comfortable with the idea of thinking of their house as like an embodied spirit. I love that. I love the spirit of houses.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was looking back, like I have this list of like titles that I wanted to call my book, and I think the care and feeding of house spirits was one of the titles I thought of.
Sure.
Because it's about that spirit that you have.
Yeah.
And everyone can feel it. You can feel it when you walk in any home, whether that's a happy home or whether there's something going on.
And again, there's that duality to me of there's the mystic part, maybe the energy part, but then the reality of, oh, this isn't comfortable. I don't like this space.
Right.
And what is that? Is it the color? I don't know. I can't characterize it, but I can identify it. I can feel it.
Right. And then saying, I can change it. Some people don't make the step to,
right.
I can actually change it. Right? Some people are like, well, I'm not happy. I'm like, okay, well, something has to change.
And I wonder if they, as far-fetched as this sounds, they don't know that they're unhappy. Or they haven't.
Right.
To me, it gets back to your intentionality. To be aware and take it in, oh, I feel like this, and here's why I feel like this, and then that you're the master, that you can do something about it.
Yeah, I don't often ask myself if I'm happy, because I find, like, for me, it's a little bit problematic, even though it just like came out of my mouth. Like, when I think about it, happiness to me is more like being in my house, doing things in my house. If I'm active and I'm kind of like puttering and taking care of things and feeding the plants and taking care, like that feels happy.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
You and I had a conversation before, I think, and I said, my happy place is the garage.
Right, right.
And the reason is my garage, it doesn't house a car, it never will. It's where I build things.
Right.
And that's, I like to build things.
I love that.
Yeah, so.
Cool.
Emily Grosvenor, thank you so much.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
Great book. Larry, if we can do emilygrover.com.
Yep.
And people can go and find out more and find out where the book's, there you are. Find out where the book is available. And we're ready for your next one.
Thanks. I have some ideas.
Do you really? Good.
I do.
Well, we'll make a date. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. This is The Writing Life. I'm Stephen W. Long, and I have a website. Write to me. I'm lonely. StephenWLong.com. So, see you later. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Glad
You're so good.